Eli Fisher, are you ready to take the lead?
Yep.
Okay. So it's 4:45. We can continue. Do we have Sivan on? Sivan, is it fine to begin with the?
Okay, so I'm going to do this introduction as quickly as possible because I'm actually really excited to hear from these next two presenters. The primary presentation is by Professor Marcin Wodzinski of the University of Wrocław. He is the professor of Judaic Studies and the head of the University of Wrocław's Department of Jewish Studies. And Professor Wodzinski has previously worked as the chief historian for the Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw, the Polin Museum. He's also the first academic to conduct a comprehensive study on contemporary Hasidism, which, for those who are in the know or are aware, that one of his primary research tools for demographic data on contemporary Hasidism is the phone books that are produced by the various Hasidic courts of today. And he's also written on the conflict between Hasidim and Maskilim in 19th century Poland. His 2018 book, The Historical Atlas of Hasidism, was awarded the National Jewish Book Award for Scholarship for that year. And I actually have it here on my shelf, and it's really a wonderful, wonderful volume. And it was as a result of that, it was as a result of, sort of my, I don't know if I want to call it an infatuation, but, it was through that volume that I initially got in touch with Professor Wodzinski, and it was because of that we began to work together on the Prenumeranten project, a project to, I'll give the definition here. Prenumeranten are the subscriber lists that appear in Jewish books starting in the late 18th century. And so without any further ado, Professor Wodzinski.
Now it will be better after I unmuted myself, right? Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm very glad I'll be able to talk about the project that I do together with Eli Fisher and Moshe Shaw of the Elijah Lab, Haifa University. We do it together as a research project funded by a generous foundation that prefers to say anonymous. And we are exactly halfway of the 3-year project. So actually, I'll be talking more about what we intend than what we achieved, because we are still before the major leap into what will be the final results of the project. But still, I believe what we can see today gives us a hint of what is possibility, what is potential of the tool that we are attempting to create. I need to start with explanation. Or actually, I need to start with PowerPoint. I need to start with the explanation of what the Prenumeranten lists are. This is a phenomenon that is not limited to the Jewish culture. These are, essentially speaking, pre-subscription lists. I'm confident that most of you know about how it functions, but still I believe I need to give some background to this. Pre-subscription lists were collected by either an author or agent or other people in order to finance future publication of the book. The earliest subscription list that we are aware of is actually in an English book, Ductor in Linguas. It's 1617. We don't know any earliest of those. A kind of an English boom on subscription list begins with 1657 Polyglotta publication, the Hebrew and Greek Bible with multiple translations. This huge publication was mostly financed by subscriptions, and from this mid-17th century in English language book world, the publication, the subscription is started to develop rapidly. The English word, as we know it now, produce a bit more than 5,000 subscription lists. It's several million people. We know also about some 800 subscription lists for musical publications and some others. And this is important to know because this allows us to appreciate what's the size of Jewish book subscription list. We are talking about very sizable collection of data. The earliest Jewish subscription list mentioned in a text is from 1661. This is Michlal Yofi by Yaakov Abendana. It does not give the subscription list yet. It gives only information about subscriptions being collected. But 7 years later, in Keter Kahuna by David Cohen de Lara, there is a list of people that the author thanks to for supporting the publication or for allowing the publication. And from the analysis of this list that you can see on the screen now, it transpires this is actually the subscription list. So we would say that the earliest one is 1668. From what we have from 1668 to 1950s, when the phenomenon actually ceased to exist, we have so far around 2,200 subscription lists. And if you think about, say, 800 musical lists, if you compare it to several hundred known subscription lists for Polish literature, or 5,000 for all of English language literature, this is very sizable number. This testifies to importance of publishing by subscription, but it also testifies to the importance of the database that might emerge from merging and annotating and proper annotating all those lists. Because what is the importance, I believe, of the source that will come out from this is that we are able to create a corpus of information about book production, book distribution, and book reception that will be extremely egalitarian, that will cover a long period from 18th till mid-20th century, that covers all the territories of Jewish book existence, and that is multifunctional. And I hope to show you in remaining 25 minutes or something, some of the features of what we are trying to do. The Jewish subscription lists are actually quite a well-known feature in Jewish historiography, of course, and there are multiple uses of those. Yakov Szatzki, for example, when analyzing Hebrew Maskilic literature in Poland, was using extensively subscription lists for his writings. Zev Gris was analyzing subscription lists when writing about history of Hebrew book. Stefan Lied, quite recently, when publishing, as he was calling it, the key to Haskalah in Germany, actually the analysis is based mostly on subscription lists. Bart Wallet, when writing about Yiddish historiography, I mean Jewish historiography in Yiddish in Northern Holland, is also based in big measure. He's also referring to subscription lists. So there's what I'm showing here on the screen is my personal use of subscription lists, which I did for my historical atlas of Hasidism that can be mentioned, and of the nearly 3,000 Hasidic prayer houses that I managed to document from early 20th century, almost 20% of the data set came from subscription lists, which is very significant contribution. And there are many more uses of this kind of data. What we are missing so far is the knowledge of all the set, because in everything that we had so far, we were referring to pieces of these lists. We were referring to either publication by Ber Kagan, this is the book from 1975 that was trying to collect all the known subscription lists to him, but we are talking about a bit more than 1,000, or subsequent amendments to this publication, most importantly by Shlomo Katsav. In 3 small volumes, he published several hundred other lists. But as I say, those data collect information about books. They collect information, the books by subscriptions. They collect information about places where from subscriptions those books came from, and they collect information about institutions mentioned in those. But it doesn't go into the single biggest category of those subscription lists, which I believe are the most valuable for us, and they will create the most valuable corpus of data, because together with some 2,200 books that we have so far in our database, and with around 10,000 localities across the world, mostly in Eastern Ashkenaz, we have around 1 million personal names mentioned there. And this is, as far as I know, the biggest such information, the biggest data set for analyzing the reception and circulation of publications in Jewish world, or actually might be in the circulation of books in 18th, 19th century in general. I was trying to compare it to what is happening in literature on book consumption more generally, starting from Robert Darnton or Chatier, or recently Simon Burrows on The Business of Enlightenment, Anna Montoya, and those large, huge projects, also as part of them in digital humanities, they differ from what we are trying to do by essentially basing their big data on book distribution by numbers of copies distributed. So we know, in maybe the best known of those cases by Simon Burrows, we know what are the number of individual books sent from Neuchâtel to different localities in Europe. So we know which title by which number at which date went into individual locations. So we know how books were distributed, but actually don't know how those books were either financed by individual buyers or then received among those people who were the buyers of those books. What our project might contribute is exactly this aspect. We hope that we will be able to see where those books went to. But before we get to this, I think it's important to explain what is the profile of the book. Because obviously, if we speak about Jewish books, our essential body of analysis are Hebrew, Yiddish, Ladino, and all other books in Jewish alphabet. But we are also including other books that are either bilingual or obviously Jewish by the Jews for the Jews for the Jewish use also. So those are the fringes of what of all the corpus that we are covering. As I was saying, 2,200 books. They are distributed chronologically, as you said, as you can see on the chart, which is very much interesting. And I don't have full answer to this. I hope Avni will understand it better. Why we have two peaks, one in the 1830s and the second one in the 1930s. Actually, the 1930s is very understandable. And the break of the wave in the 1910s is the First World War, and then the end of this wave. And in the 1930s is obviously the Second World War and the Holocaust. But what is happening between the 1820s and 1850s, it's not quite clear to me. I was trying to analyze those data, why there is popularity of subscription lists, Jewish subscription lists up to 1830s, and then it goes down to re-emerge later on. One of the factors might be closure of Jewish printing shops in Russia in 1836-37. Several of those are closing down, and then the business moves to Zhytomyr and Vilna, two licensed Jewish printing shops in the Russian Empire that exist since then. This might be one of the phenomenon, but also what we see is that in the 1830s there is a number of relatively small printing shops emerging in Eastern Europe in variety of places. And if, for example, Krotoshin later on in the 1840s or 1860s would publish a lot of books, but not by subscription lists, the very beginning of their activities is connected to subscription lists. So in the early stage of activity, they needed the financial support for publishing of those books. So you have quite an extensive list of books from minor publishers emerging in the 1830s. With time, they stabilize, they have better financial ground, possibly, so they decrease number of books published by subscriptions, even though they don't decrease the number of books published as such, because this is still growing. So this is my understanding of the chronology of how subscription lists are emerging. And there's also interesting to see geographical spread of those books. This is globally. So obviously you see the center in Europe, and in Europe you see an interesting pattern of having strong overrepresentation of Eastern Europe and kind of clear distinction between northern and eastern part of Eastern Ashkenaz, mainly into territories of Galicia, Congress Kingdom, and Lithuania, with few dominant publishing centers, while in Romania and Hungary, you have a lot of smaller publishers in a big density of this territory. All in all, we come to the to numbers with Warsaw being the biggest of those publishers, then Jerusalem, then Piotrków Trybunalski, otherwise not a very significant place, but very important for publishing with subscriptions. What we have on the list allows us also to see which types of books are overrepresented on the list, meaning what types of books people choose to publish with subscription lists. Because this is not representative, it needs to be remembered. What we will collect is not representative for all Jewish books. It's representative for certain types, and I would say 6 such types. First of all, books by lesser-known authors, meaning authors for whom there is bigger risk of financial failure. The publisher, the printer, does not want to publish the book of an unknown author if the author or his agent will not come with funds for printing it, right? So that's first category. On the other hand, quite interestingly, we have quite a big number of Maskili books, for which we cannot say these are either unknown or very localized. To the contrary, possibly the fact that they are published by subscriptions actually addresses the issue of the wider geographical extent. They need to collect subscriptions from larger areas, because otherwise it would be very difficult to reach information about those books out there. There's also an important factor of publishing ads for subscription in Hebrew periodicals, which is a factor increasing percentage of subscription lists on Maskili books. Interestingly, if you look at the genre, there is very clear overrepresentation of homilies and sermons and underrepresentation of responsa. And I'm not quite sure why it is so. It seems that essentially the audience is very similar for those two kind of books. This is a learned rabbinical elite, and in big measure, this is a learned rabbinical elite concentrated on certain areas of activities of the author of this book. But still, there is very clear distinction. There is another very obvious overrepresentation of books published serially, like Mishnah and Chumash, encyclopedias, and also periodicals. And there's obvious tendency to have them on subscription list. And 2 other categories that actually stand out from the picture, of the dominant picture, but they also show that there are different motives for publishing books on subscriptions. One of them are several books by well-known authors, often by Hasidic leaders, and like the Gerer Rebbe, like Chaim Halberstam of Tzanz, like the Komarner Rebbe. And those books, when you have subscription lists, it seems that those subscription lists serve slightly different goals. So, for example, this is from the reprinting of one such book, Pri Tzadik, and it testifies actually to the fact that the subscription list is considered to be wholly part of the holy book. That this is, and possibly publishing this book with subscription list, which was accompanied by the blessing from the author, from the tzaddik, was not so much the way of purchasing a copy of the book or supporting publication of the book, but rather it was the way to come into religious interaction with the author. And this is testified, actually confirmed by the fact that in quite a number of those books, people are not identified by first name and then patronymic or the last name, but much more often by the first name and the matronymic name of mother and not father, which is the Hasidic custom of identifying people on Kvitlech, on petition to the Rebbe. So in this sense, that the prenumeranten list is a kind of the list that the Rebbe is supposed to read and pray for, right? So we see a different subgroup of books that are published on prenumeranten lists, and sometimes those lists are very extensive. several dozen pages, and many hundreds names appearing there for different reasons than the above. And the last category of books published by subscriptions are those by well-known authors when they are entering unknown waters, when they are entering into different territories where they are not so well received. And the best example we have is about the Vilna Gaon, who is huge rabbinical authority in all Poland, Lithuania. But when in 1810s there is a number of books by him published in Bohemia and Moravia, he's not a well-known author there, so he needs to be introduced by subscription lists. And actually we can trace very interestingly the way how those subscriptions are collected there, and I hope to return to this in a moment. Another issue with subscriptions, before we come to the list itself, is what we know about subscription process, and we know quite little, I must say. For example, we know it was sometimes collected by the author. This you can find in papers of Shlomo Ettinger. Sometimes these were agents who collected subscriptions for the author. Sometimes it was a relative, and here is a beautiful example of Shoresh Ishai, a commentary on the book of Ruth by Shlomo Alkabetz, reissued in 1891 by otherwise unknown person of David Shmuel Katz of Novoselica. And that's fascinating because he died before the book was published, and his wife remained with a big family, many small children, and a manuscript. So her brother decided to go village by village and to visit several hundred localities, collecting from all of those localities subscriptions. And actually what we have as a subscription list that is represented here on this map is the list not put in alphabetical order of towns, but in chronological orders of towns visited. So what we can reconstruct here is fascinating route of traveling of this individual. But in several cases, we have those routes of traveling with subscription lists, with a person who would enter every village, there would talk to the local community about the value of this book and about the need of charity to support the widow after the death of the author, and then he would collect those money. So we have two phenomena of book publishing and the charity in one, but in addition to this, what we get are the routes of collecting those, which actually tells us about possible routes of book circulation in those areas, because we can very easily guess that these would be, and actually we have confirmation that other subscriptions went on similar routes. So we might say this is how book circulation, book distribution went into in those territories. As for subscriptions for marketing strategies, we know quite little, and sometimes, as here in Alim Letrufa, 1778, we can read about two types of paper, and we can read about kind of selling incentives that if you purchase 10 copies for other people, the 11th copy would be yours, but actually have very little of this kind of information. With all those data, what we are intending to do, and I believe I've already mentioned this, is collecting all those lists, more than 2,000, annotating them with locality, having every single book, every single author, every single locality, and every single subscriber described and put into fully searchable database. I very much hope this will allow us to this will allow us to see multiple of issues. This will allow us, for example, to see what is relation between type of the book and gender of the of people buying it. We have for gender issue in some of the books we have, as you can see on this image, we have separate Ezrat Nashim, literally Ezrat Nashim, Vilna Mechorodna, meaning meaning there is a separate list for men and women supporting publishing of this book. On many other lists, we have women mentioned among men, or on the end of the list for each locality they are mentioned. Sometimes it is very clear that some of the publications have much stronger representation of women than others, and some of the findings that we have so far are, I would say, not surprising, but actually it's still better to know than to expect. If you go, for example, into publishing of the Beis-Yaakov School or publication of Saakashvili, you have huge overrepresentation of women on those lists, which obviously testifies to the importance of those publications for women, but it also allows us to trace kind of canonization of her figure and her publications for the audience. We can also go much further into mapping each of the publication lists, and what you see here, you have these red dots that are telling you where subscriptions were collected, but you have also the orange dots that tell you that in those localities there were students from those localities in yeshiva studying there in Preshburg, on Košice or Ushhorod, meaning that we can reconstruct not only the book circulation itself, but we can also reconstruct to the quite unprecedented precise way, we can reconstruct the networks of the spatial extension of influence of individual yeshivot throughout the 19th and early 20th century. So that's another aspect that we can cover here. Obviously, with 1 million people, of which the vast majority were not well-known rabbis or tzaddikim or businessmen or people who made their strong imprint on history, we have huge problem of identification. And this is something that VIAF will not respond, that we need to create our own system, and we are still ahead of this. We discussed this issue. If we have 15 Isaacs ben Abraham of Warsaw, we need to know if it is the same person, is it 15 different Isaacs from Warsaw, and can we put them together, or can we tentatively put them together or not? So those are the questions that we obviously have to address here. If project is successful, I was trying to say so, but let me summarize it. I believe it has potential to respond to before I get to this, another factor that we hope to include, and that we are testing this already, is the similarity ratio. And this is something that we believe might open for a direction of interpretation of the books and of circulation of those books that does not come in kind of our common sense thinking about those books, because we might discover similarities between books that are otherwise very distant from each other. And this, we hope, will be an eye-opening phenomenon for other studies. If the project is successful, as we hope, and we will know it by October 22, I hope it will contribute to at least 3 major research areas. One is history of book production, and this is what I've already mentioned. This is about the general way of the ways of financing the book production and how the financial aspect of this went through. The other one, already mentioned too, is tracing the book sale routes, as we saw with Shoresh Ishai, and as we saw, for example, with those books by Gaon of Vilna in Bohemia in 1810s. You can see several routes as mapped here that actually create several very distinct travel routes and several district areas of book circulation. So that's another aspect that we hope the project will contribute to. There is also, and to me, this is possibly most exciting, history of book reception. So one aspect is geographical spread of certain books, and I hope we'll be able to establish book consumption centers and their diversification by genre, by ideological profile, by specific authors. We'll be able to see where books of individual authors were more popular than elsewhere, and I expect we have a lot of surprises that go beyond the fact that an author from A will be most popular in A. networks of subscribers and overlaps of those. And here, I'm especially excited about the possibility of clustering those data that our database will also provide, because then we will be able to see how the book consumption is divided into different clusters of different ideas, genres, types of readership. Then gender in book consumption and book support, as I mentioned, but also I very much hope we'll be able to get to the issue of class or professional profiles. Quite a number of individuals on those lists are identified by either their social status or rarely by their profession, and I hope that we will be able to see how the books and their circulation areas divide by this. And finally, there is huge area of history of other related phenomena that those subscription lists will be obviously a most exciting source. And actually, this is already used for some of them. One of them is obviously genealogical material. For many people, this will be precious genealogical information about individuals. There's also onomastics. And an aspect of onomastics here is the Hebrew gazetteer, Hebrew English gazetteer, that has been already created and is used for variety of ways. But it's also about the first names and last names, when they appear, what is local popularity. This is again 1 million people that will be able to very specifically pin to individual localities and individual days about first name, last names, and other ways of identifying those people. There's also issue of yeshiva networks that I mentioned that will be able to recreate for huge number of books and big number of yeshivot. And I don't know any research that would do it so far. But also a fascinating issue of Hasidic library, for example, or Maskilic library. Actually, Maskilic library has been touched on several issues by quite a number of scholars, and part of the subscription list have been used for this. Now we have possibility of doing this in the most systematic way with all of those. But the same I very much hope to do for Hasidic library. We'll be finally able to see what was on the shelf in Hasidic Batei Midrash. We'll be able to see which books were bought by Hasidic authorities, who was buying books by Hasidic authorities, and on. And finally, last but not least, this is a precious material for histories of individual figures or groups of people who was subscribing to what. I'm now working on Polish and Jewish Enlightenment in Poland, and my such figure is Avraham Stern, for whom I counted it's very preliminary, but I was able to for 800 books that I have from him. I'm comparing actually the library that he had with subscription lists, and I'm trying to follow what is the overlap of those two. It is possible to establish how many books from which publishing place, where it was, what is the distribution. Very interestingly, Avraham Stern was living in the first half of the 19th century in Warsaw, right? But the vast majority of books are not from Warsaw, actually not from even Eastern Europe. The strongest centers you have in Leipzig, Halle, and Berlin, right? It's only then followed by Warsaw and other Żółkiew, Sadylków, and other localities. But then you can also divide it by genre, and you can see that even though Avraham Stern was best known as the inventor and technical genius, the biggest share of his library is religious. It's Hebrew religious with a big share of anti-Christian polemics, taking prominent example there, and so on and so forth. And very much hope to hear your comments and criticism on this project, because as I say, we are halfway, and we can still change issues within it. Now I expect it will be Avri commenting on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Wodzinski. It's my pleasure now to introduce Professor Avriel Bar-Levav. Professor Bar-Levav is the head of the Department of History, Philosophy, and Judaic Studies at the Open University of Israel. His research has focused on the history of books, the history of book reception, and book culture in the Jewish world, and on the history of death and dying and death-related rituals. He recently edited the book Textual Transmission in Contemporary Jewish Cultures that was published in 2020 by Oxford. Professor Bar-Levav, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very, very much, Marcin, for this wonderful presentation. And thank you for the opportunity to respond to it. I prepared several notes and I had to erase them, at least some of them one by one, because you related to them yourself. But still, I'll just share some thoughts and questions. Maybe starting with the end and then of your presentation, and then coming back to the beginning about Avraham Stern. You mentioned his library, but actually what we know, if I understand correctly, is not necessarily his library, but his Praenumeranten library. From the project, we know what books he ordered as a Praenumerant, and it is a question sometimes solvable, sometimes not solvable. And I mean, what is the library at whole? And I think this brings us to the point of the relation between the text, the readers, and the book. And I thought, because of your project, that maybe we can expand Chartier's division between the world of text and the world of readers, and we can also add the world of the book as an object, because what we have here with this phenomena is indeed a connection between people ordering books and having a text, but we must remember that not necessarily they read those texts. And sometimes you order books because you want to be on the list of the Praenumerant, and sometimes you get it and you don't read it. Not necessarily those who order the books can be identified as readers. Of course, many times we can presume that if Hasidic people order Hasidic books, they are interested in it. But we should keep in mind, I think, the gap between ordering the book and reading and reading it, which is something else. Now, what we see here, especially in the beginning, and then it continues, but also the Haskalah comes in. What we see here is the traditional Republic of Letters, because we see really a Republic of Letters in or a certain aspect. Maybe people might argue that it's not totally or Republic of Letters met at various definitions, because most of those Praenumeranten actually they don't write books themselves; they just order them. But I think we can see here not only a network, but maybe kind of a community and identity of people gathered on one page, their names gathered on a page or 2 pages, and in that sense they make some kind of imagined community of people who are interested in the books, as I said, not necessarily readers. And I think this Ezrat Nashim is also very interesting because it shows the social aspect, like maybe women who prefer not to be mingled with men in the synagogue or in the market, so they would also prefer to be on a separate list of their own. Thus, indeed making their own network and community, which is global, and it's not. It's global, and in that sense, it's imagined. Now, I would like to share only one screen, if I can. I should be able to do it. And this is Kehilot Moshe of Moshe Frankfurt of Amsterdam, Rabbi Dayan of the Amsterdam Ashkenazi community, printed in several volumes in 1723 and 24. And it's the largest Mikraot Gdolot, Biblia Rabbinica, that exists until today. There's no larger compendium, and some of the commentators he collected, they were published in print elsewhere only at the end of the 20th century. And he had a pre-numeranten system without the names. But what he did is that he published, or it's a huge printing project. And what he did is circulate parts of the book, either Torah portions in the beginning and afterwards parts of the other books, and he circulated weekly or in certain times of the year. He says weekly. He circulated. He had a special. We know all this from what he writes. He called himself a Makil Kehilot Barabim, which is also a good definition of someone who organizes pre-numeranten. And he had a special person to work with the Sephardi community of Amsterdam, and a special person to work with the Ashkenazi one. And since it doesn't have a list of names, we can say maybe it's the prehistory of pre-numeranten. But you mentioned that we have the first list in 1668, which is only 72 years before you begin your project. And I would suggest that I imagine that the books with pre-numeranten in those 72 years, there are not so many as there are afterwards. I would suggest that you begin with the beginning of the pre-numeranten, and that you include in your survey also the books that, as I said, the prehistory, the projects of pre-numeranten that are not that do not have names, because I think it will give a broader, maybe deeper picture of the genres of what is interesting for people. And I was thinking about your questions about the peak, and also in regarding Kehilot Moshe. One thing I think that we should remember is that until the 19th century, the most expensive element needed for printing was the paper, because you can get all the rest you can get with hope and promises, because the printing press is already there, and the printer prefers the machines to work, and so he can say, well, you can tell him, well, I'll give you books, I'll give you something, and the workers are not that expensive usually, and so you can manage your way until you get to the paper. The paper is really a product, and it's an expensive product. I think until the 19th century, when the paper industry made cheaper paper, it was about 70 or 80% of the expenses was the paper. And pre-numeranten is a good way to get the capital for providing this paper, which you cannot print without it. And also because of the technology of printing, of the fact that actually books were printed gradually. It's not that all the book was printed at the same time, but they printed all the copies of one query and then the next one and so on. So you could, and sometimes we see a difference in the paper according to the financial means of the one who financed the book. So prenumeranten is a good way to get the money for the paper, and I would maybe check also with your PIX, although it's in the 19th century, I would see the price of paper at these times and see if there is anything we can learn for this. I found it very interesting to hear about the types of the books or the genres, and especially about the writers who are less important and less known. But and I think the question is, or the question that we can pose: what is the connection between genre and this specific system of producing and disseminating books? And so there is maybe an interplay between the cultural capital of the writer and the need to publish the book, maybe not totally, not with, as you said, with the Gaon of Vilna, although it can be related, as you said, to a different place. But maybe we might try to think that the less the capital, the less the cultural capital of the author and of the genre of the topic is, the more he needs prenumeranten, and I presume authors would be almost totally men. So that would be that he needs prenumeranten. But still, it is very meaningful that among those who subscribe and buy the books, we have indeed those ladies. And I was mentioned. I was reminded of actually the first time that my name appeared in print when I was quite young, and I gave a correct answer and was on the lot of the crossword puzzle of Koteret Rashit. And it was a nice feeling. And I think that those prenumeranten, some of those prenumeranten, they sought this nice feeling of having their name on a book. And maybe I'll finish with this, that we still have it going on, even on books printed today on religious and traditional books. We don't have, it's not exactly the same. It's not prenumeranten, but we have people who donate money, who have the name usually at the end of the book, if they give more than in the beginning of the book. And people like to be part of this imagined community of users of the book, which is in both imagined and realistic, because their name is fixed in a book and it is there forever. And because of this, you can make this really wonderful and exciting project that we can, as you have shown, we can really learn. There's a lot to learn from it, and I wish you a big success. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Should I get straight to answering? We have some questions in the chat and a lot of questions from Avdi. Yeah, Eli, what's
Yes.
the order?
So,
Okay,
so let's take a look. First of all, thank you very, very much, Professor Parlevav, for your food for thought and for asking the questions that, first of all, for the information, the material on early printed books, where there are subscriber lists that are not printed in books, which is something that we've wondered about, but we haven't. But we don't know a lot about. It's sort of, like that's the iceberg, the part that's underneath the water. One of the questions was, the first question was, are the lists?
Eli, this is me to respond, not you, right?
What's
Excuse
that?
me. Eli,
Yes.
is this me or you respond? Is this me or you responding?
I'm gonna pose the question. I thanked. I wanted to thank Professor.
Okay, great.
And then I'll go through the questions and I'll ask them on behalf of the audience. So the first question was whether the lists of people is open and accessible.
It will be. Namely, that we hope that the database will be available to everybody in 1.5 years from now, or maybe a bit earlier. So far, it is not. We are collecting them, scanning, OCRing, and processing into the database. So at this stage, it is not, but this is the goal of the project, that you can have either a list for each individual book, or you can have variety of search options to combine it by the name, by the book, by the date of publication, by the place of publication, by the genre of publication, by the time of life of the authors, and by all those categories, you can have advanced search that will come out with different results. So that's it. So that's for the question about. So we start from the bottom, right? Moshe asked about whether we don't need a subscription for popular text. That was my idea, actually. That was my argument, and that's what we believe it. If the author is popular, if the printer knows it brings an income, he doesn't want to share it with somebody, with an agent collecting the subscriptions, because part of the income goes into the agent then. So obviously, for the best known authors, they prefer not to have it. The best sellers by rule do not go into subscriptions. Unless this is the category, as I was saying, the Gerer Rebbe or the Komarner Rebbe giving the bracha, and people wanted to be on the list. And Avri, you're obviously right. People just want to see their name in print. You might remember Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, when the man hit by the horse carriage was happy that he was hit because the journal wrote about him, about the accident, right? So he was happy to be car hit. So that's obviously the kind of universal humans need to be mentioned in print. That's kind of prestige, celebrity, whatever. And that's one of the reasons for some of those people. And this refers to your opening issue, that people who paid for books, for subscriptions, didn't have to read them. And obviously that's true. The same extends also to libraries of actual books people have on their shelves that could be for decoration, for many other reasons, and not to read. And that's what I believe that we are doing. We are creating one more approximation, because what I started with, and as your initial question about Stern library, actually not. I'm comparing subscription of Stern by Stern with what he had on his shelf, because we have the papers after he died, and he was in serious debt when he died in 1842. So actually there were inspectors who came and took a note of every single item at his home, including 817 books. And so we know what was there actually, and we know what he subscribed to, and also we know who subscribed to his books. So we can see, we can cluster it and to see what are the overlaps of those. So I see this as important possible contribution. But obviously, subscription lists do not give us full picture of the book circulation and the book reception. This is only one of many tools. Hopefully, once we create a full searchable database of all the text of those books, we'll be able to see who was quoting whom, right? And Republic of Letters, yes, exactly. I see this as I was saying. Our project, I believe, is so exciting because it adds an egalitarian aspect to what we know from other research on the Republic of Letters. for which it was very easy to focus on the authors, to see Republic of Letters as people who write. This is the easiest way to look on the Republic of Letters, but obviously Republic of Letters includes also those who read and support, and Prenumeranten is exactly the list of people who at least intended to lead and obviously intended to support the publication. And it's even more exciting when you see the same names reappearing time and again. So you see there's a profile of this and this individual. So for example, if we go into Warsaw Maskilic publications, and I did it for a small number, we don't have the full subscription list for all of them. I did it for 4 books only, and you have huge overrepresentation of Warsaw Jewish bourgeoisie. 17% of the names on the list are Warsaw Jewish bourgeoisie. 39% of the people on the list are non-Jews. The vast majority of those non-Jews being official of the state institutions. Among them, people who are authors of prints on the so-called Jewish question in Poland and Eastern Europe, people writing literature. So you have actually very strong proof of interconnections that go not only within Jewish culture, but it also gives us the aspect of the Republic of Letters, this is most important, which is going beyond individual literatures, beyond Jewish, Polish, German, or English, right? We see it as really pan-European, universal phenomenon, but also at the same time we see the bottleneck. We see where it is narrowing and what is left outside, what is not going out, right? So this is in response to your comment about the Republic of Letters, and this is indeed the big issue. The woman that you mentioned, separating them, or they separated from others, and it's another issue that needs to be very carefully approached here, because we might obviously assume they preferred to be on a separate list, but we might also equally assume others didn't want them to be there, right? So this is the issue about the gender. You are very right about the start date, that we should push back into the 17th century. And actually, this is my oversight to start with 1780s. The project itself takes into consideration all those discussions of Prenumeranten, even if we don't have this. So obviously we include this material. I did my only explanation for doing this silly mistake of starting in 1780s is that I intended to discuss the database, which is relevant for the age research, right? And this is not until 1780s when we have numbers of books that we can put together. Paper production is a very interesting trend, and I will obviously follow this. And the issue of the connection between genre and subscriptions, how it is connected to cultural capital. Obviously, we started with this concept, and actually, it's very difficult to me to see what would be the difference between Responsa and Shutin by the same author, for example, right? Why one would put into subscriptions and second would not. So there is possibility of linking it that way, but I don't see how to resolve this issue yet. Sinai, a question about Isaac of Ben Abraham of Warsaw. Oh yeah, surely. This is fortunately not my job, but Moshe Shaw, who is doing those issues, and we'll have to establish criteria. And as we had similarity ratio, possibly for the vast majority of people that we don't recognize, we'll say this person is in 70% identical to such and such person, but in 30% it is not, right? Because the time difference is more than 30 years, for example, and on. Obviously, we'll have to include those kind of criteria. We are still before implementing those issues. We've just discussed them last week. All the team spent a week in Wrocław, and we discussed those issues in depth. But there are no outcomes of this discussion so far.
Yeah, I would have to recommend Wrocław. It was a beautiful place to visit, and we had a lovely time there, hosted by the university and Professor Wozinski's department. We're going to close the session here, but people can feel free to stay on, and we can feel free to continue the conversation. But for those who want to step out and take a breather before the next session starts at 6 o'clock, at 6 p.m. Israel time, I guess that would be 11 a.m. Eastern time in the United States.